Okay, so let me know if there's any sort of trouble. Thanks, Nandini, for introducing me. My name is Conor. I'm a senior at Yale University studying philosophy and cognitive science. And my goal today is to introduce all of you to a set of questions that cut to the heart of moral decision making. So often moral agents are uncertain about what they ought to do. This uncertainty is not always reducible to uncertainty about the state of the world or uncertainty about the outcomes of particular actions. Sometimes it reflects a fundamental moral uncertainty. Moral agents. Today, I want to explore how agents subjectively ought to act in the face of such uncertainty. By subjective ought, I mean how someone is rationally required to act on the basis of, or based on, their subjective beliefs. To illustrate, imagine you see me poison a cup of tea before handing it to you. Since you believe that the tea is poisoned, it would be irrational for you to drink the tea. That's true even if you happen to be wrong about the empirical facts and I did not actually poison the tea. But because you believe that there's poison in it, it would be irrational for you to drink it. In this discussion, I'm going to set aside questions about what moral theories are correct or which moral theories an agent ought to believe in, and focus instead on how an agent ought to act given the beliefs that they already have. Let's start with an example. Suppose Mevat is uncertain about whether or not to eat meat. On one hand, she thinks it is likely permissible to eat meat, and she enjoys how it tastes. But she also thinks there's a sizable chance Mevat's uncertainty in the following way. She has 70% credence in theory M, according to which eating meat is slightly better than not eating meat. And she has 30% credence in theory V, which says eating meat is very, very bad. Both of the theories claim that not eating meat is totally neutral. So how should Mevat act? One popular answer draws on how we rationally respond to empirical uncertainty. When we are uncertain about the outcomes of our actions, we can calculate the expected utility of each outcome by the conditional probability of the outcome given the action, and then choose the action which maximizes expected utility. The parallel for this, and the intuitive application of this principle for moral uncertainty, is formalized in the philosophical literature as maximize expected value. Agents ought to choose the option that has maximal expected moral value as determined by the agent's credence in different theories and the amount of moral value at stake for each theory. So using some simple estimates for how not eating meat maximizes expected value. The expected value of eating meat is negative 665, whereas the expected value of not eating meat is 10, which is much higher. However, maximizing expected value runs into a problem, the problem of intertheoretic value comparisons. This is the worry that there is no non-arbitrary way to compare the moral evaluations of different moral theories. In our example, we assumed that we could simply compare the values in our theories as though M is equated to one unit of value according to theory V. However, nothing in our...
Hi, sorry to interrupt you. We can only see your first slide and not...
Oh, I'm so sorry.
We can see it now, yes.
Did it just jump ahead with that? Like, have the slides not been changing at all?
It didn't change automatically, so it's still on the first slide.
Okay, sorry. So what do you see right now?
Problem of intertheoretic value comparisons.
Okay.
Case study, yep.
I see. Okay, I'm going to change the slide. Can you tell me if it changes?
Sure.
Did anything change?
Nope.
Okay. I'm so sorry about that.
No worries.
Okay, there might be another way that I can present. I'll try to do that. Okay, so the problem of intertheoretic value comparisons is this worry that there is no non-arbitrary way to compare the moral evaluations of different moral theories. Like I said, in this example, we assumed that we could just compare the value of theory M to theory V as though there's a one-to-one comparison. Each unit of value in, say, the 50 for theory M, for theory V for eating meat. However, nothing in our theories actually gives us the grounds to make this assumption. Theories only represent the value of options relative to other evaluations on the selfsame theory. And while cardinal theories, such as these, assign fine-grained comparisons of the value between different options, various representations of cardinal theories are only unique up to positive affine transformation. This means that I could represent the fact that eating meat
Yes.
Okay, great. This means that I could represent the fact that eating meat is 5 times as valuable as not eating meat, according to theory M, using 50 to 10, but also 5 to 1, 1 to 0.2, 50,000 to 10,000. I can just scale the rest of the evaluations of the theory accordingly. The same is true for theory V. Nothing tells us which representations to use in order to accurately represent how much value is at stake relative to the other theory. But the choice 50,000 and 10,000, for example, for theory M, and left theory V the same, eating meat would have greater expected value. The same problem is present for absolutist theories or theories that are structurally different than each other. It isn't clear, for example, how we would compare the moral value or moral stakes of an absolutist theory to those of a cardinal theory. There are a few possible answers to the problem of intertheoretic value comparisons, but I'm interested in a particular response known as content-based comparisons, or CBC. CBC proposes that we use shared substantive commitments between theories to compare theoretic valuations on the same scale. This method is necessarily limited in scope because it only works for theories that share some identical moral value, but I believe that it has theoretical and practical plausibility. It's also particularly promising for effective altruists and X-risk mitigation. For instance, effective altruists are typically certain that the welfare of current humans is morally valuable, but they are unsure about the value of other categories, such as the value of animals, synthetic intelligences, or the value of future lives. If CBC is successful, then the points of agreement that we have on moral features, such as the value of current human welfare, can serve as the basis for comparison on all of the other values in our moral theories. For example, imagine we have 2 theories, A and B, which we think are likely to be true, the true moral theory. We believe A is likely to be the true moral theory with probability P, and we believe theory B is likely to be the true moral theory with probability 1 minus B. Theory A says that present human and animal well-being are the only things with moral value, and that human well-being is twice as important as animal well-being. Theory B says that present and future human well-being are the only things with moral value and that they are equally important. Using the shared agreement on the value of present human well-being, we can standardize our evaluations of the parts of our theories that disagree using an intertheoretic exchange rate. Then we can construct a function to determine the maximal expected value of, say, different altruistic donation portfolios. This sort of comparison seems to have clear practical implications. For instance, since theories which value future people are likely to posit high expected value for actions which are beneficial to the far future, CBC might demand that people prioritize future-oriented actions such as risk mitigation. Another appealing feature of CBC is that it allows us to compare values across non-overlapping theories using chains of bridge theories. Although T1 and T3 in this example share no overlapping value, T2, which overlaps with each of the other theories, provides a sort of bridge between the two. Long chains of such overlapping theories might allow us to compare huge swaths of moral theories to each other. In the remainder of the talk, I'm going to analyze 2 potential pitfalls for CBC. First, it isn't obvious that CBC actually solves the problem of intertheoretic value comparisons. It still seems as though nothing tells us that the nominally identical values in the theories are legitimately represented using the same scale. For example, average utilitarianism, which determines the value of an outcome based on the average well-being of people in that outcome, and total utilitarianism, which determines value based on the sum of all the well-being in an outcome, both seem to value human well-being. But they do so in substantially different ways that don't seem to be represented by the same scale. For instance, adding a fairly happy person to the world might be bad according to the average view, but good according to the total view. It would be bad according to the average view because it would bring down the average value, but good according to the total view because it increases the total amount of value. This is a feature of this feature that we might not be able to compare values that are nominally the same may actually undercut our ability to compare valuations on the basis of shared content across the board, because any shared value could still be represented using a different form of representation. To actually confront PIVC, CBC needs to appeal to the common justification of moral values. On this picture, comparable values share complete agreement about the metaphysical underpinnings of the value. They agree about exactly how and why the thing is valuable in the first place. This gives us a compelling reason to think that the values are appropriately represented on the same scale. They are essentially the exact same subtheory adopted by both of the parent theories. This fortifies CBC against the problem of intertheoretic value comparisons, but it creates another bottleneck on the applicability of CBC. Even for theories that appear to value the same thing in the same way, they're only comparable if they actually do, if they completely agree on the grounding of those similar values. This might be a problem if we're uncertain about the precise grounding of our values. For instance, agents who are confident in total utilitarianism, say, might split their credence between a contractualist justification and a classical justification. On the contractualist view, normative principles are those that rational self-interested decision makers would endorse from behind a veil of ignorance, and a veil in which they don't know who or if they will be in the world. The contractualist may justify the value of an obligation to maximize average total well-being on the fact that each decision maker behind the veil of ignorance would rationally prefer a world in which total well-being was maximized, as that would maximize each of their expected well-being. In contrast, the classical justification posits that pleasure is the one intrinsic good and pain the one intrinsic bad. This generates an obligation to maximize the sum total of pleasurable experiences in the world, subtracting all of the painful experiences. Despite agreement between the views on the value of human well-being and apparent agreement on how we can represent such well-being, these theories would always agree that adding one extra happy person to the world would be a good thing. CBC provides no way to compare the two views. They could always be represented by different value functions, like we saw before. So CBC is inapplicable for certain problems at the core of moral uncertainty. A second problem for CBC is the inconsistent ratio problem, which arises when an agent has credence in several moral theories that are linked together by overlapping values, but whose exchange rate between the values are jointly inconsistent. Suppose that Raoul has credence in three pluralist consequentialist theories, T1, T2, and T3, whose common values share an identical moral grounding. According to CBC, Raoul can standardize the evaluations of these theories according to their shared content by creating an intertheoretic exchange rate for the respective values, which he can then use to calculate the expected moral value of different options. However, imagine that Raoul develops credence in the following additional theory, T4. Since T2 and T4 here provide different intertheoretic value ratios for the same values, Raoul no longer has a non-arbitrary way to standardize values within the theories. The theories have complete agreement on the moral grounding of C and D, but they use different exchange rates. If Raoul uses T2 as a basis for standardization, then 1B would equal 1E. But if Raoul uses T4 for standardization, then 1B equals 8E. And Raoul has no way to choose between T4 and T2 as the basis for standardization. However, even in a case like this, it seems like an agent might still be able to use CBC to make limited comparisons on the basis of their moral beliefs. Take Raoul's belief in theories T1 through T4 as a case study. Raoul can specify all of the maximal consistent subsets of his theories, subsets which don't generate any inconsistencies, but would generate inconsistencies if you added any additional theory to the subset. For Raoul, these subsets include the first subset, T1, T2, T3, and the second subset, T1, T3, and T4. Raoul can find the exchange rates appropriate to each subset and then evaluate which options maximize expected value according to each subset. There are a few reasonable ways to think about Raoul's obligation in such a case. Raoul might seem to be obligated to choose options that are best in expectation according to both subsets. We also might think it's impermissible for Raoul to choose an option that's worse in expectation than another option according to both subsets. And it also seems plausible that Raoul ought to make decisions in such a situation using the following supervaluation principle. and option O is permissible if and only if it maximizes expected value according to at least one of the maximal consistent subsets. So that's a look at how CBC might be able to respond to the inconsistent ratios problem. And in general, CBC might offer us a path to make critical decisions under moral uncertainty, including questions concerning EA cause prioritization and questions around existential risk. Of course, this was only a brief sketch of all of content-based comparisons, its problems, and its potential. So if you're interested in further exploration, I would encourage all of you to read the paper that is going to be published in the CERI journal that I wrote and the sources that are cited therein. I also just want to take a moment to thank the people who made this presentation and work possible, including all of the CERI staff, the other fellows in the program, and Christian Tarsti of the Global Priorities Institute, who was my mentor for the summer and put in a lot of work to help me actualize all of this. So thank you all. Now I'll open up the floor for questions.
Thank you, Conor. If anyone does have any questions, as always, just raise your hand or just feel free to unmute and ask away.
Yeah, just one question. Conor. Thanks a lot for your talk. We already chatted about this, so I've just got like an additional question I didn't have before, which was, to what extent does these kinds of intertheoretic comparisons based on expected value depend on Bayesianism as a rational choice theory? Because there is some work going on about how that might not be the rational choice in non-empirical cases. So yeah, to what extent is it based on that?
Yeah, I don't know that it completely relies on Bayesianism. In fact, you might imagine cases in which Bayesianism poses some problems for content-based comparisons. So if you think it's possible to condition Bayesian beliefs on probabilities which you assign, on conditions which you assign 0 probability to, then you might think it's possible for you to believe in a certain theory that says, say, only human welfare is valuable, but, or say it says human welfare is valuable and animal welfare is half as valuable. But you might also have the belief that conditioned on something like future human well-being also being valuable, animal well-being is actually equally valuable to human well-being. So I don't think it's as straightforward as saying that Bayesianism is perfectly like aligns with the content-based comparison way of thinking. In fact, I think it might actually pose some problems, but I think it's a good question to think about how our background beliefs about how we think about belief in the first place would affect some of these rational choice theories. Yeah, Matthew.
Go for it.
Yeah, well, this is a question sort of more generally about theories about sort of expected moral value and how to deal with it. There are certain kinds of moral beliefs that some people hold, which have, for me, intuitively, just no traction whatsoever. If we look at sort of some of the things in sort of moral foundations theory, the value of sacredness, for instance, some people think it's just terribly immoral to burn a flag. To me, it seems like a matter of utter moral indifference. It seems on the kind of reasoning you're putting forward, and many other people put forward with this, that I ought to attach some non-zero probability to the fact that if I burn a flag, I'm doing something terribly wrong, and consequently, I ought to eschew burning flags, even though it seems fairly clear to me there's absolutely nothing wrong with doing so. To me, maybe that's a conclusion I should draw, but if one's an eternalist at any rate about ethical judgments, I know that I feel just no worry and no motivation to avoid burning flags. I don't, whereas with an empirical question, if I had some doubt about it, I might be anxious that I could be wrong in my empirical judgment and thus be doing something wrong. if I go out and burn a flag tonight, I'm not going to lie awake at night worrying that there's some, I don't know, 2% chance that flag burning is a horribly wrong thing to do.
Yeah.
Should I just be an externalist and metaethically about this and sort of say, well, okay, I may not be worried about this, but nevertheless, I ought not to do it because it could be a terribly wrong thing to do? Or it just seems to me highly counterintuitive.
Yeah, I think this general problem that there could be theories that you assign very low probability to, but that have, because of very high expected costs or expected benefits, they have very high expected value for you to follow the guidance of those theories, is another general objection to content-based comparisons and to views that are analogous to it, that are situated in maximizing expected value in a sort of framework like this. And I think that's a problem that expected utility theory runs into in general. So it might be a problem that's bigger than just, it's not just situated in the moral realm. So you might think if there's a solution in the realm of expected utility, in which we might have some reason to discount those very, very small probabilities in things that have high expected value, then you might think the same sort of solution there would apply in the realm of moral expected value. But in thinking about your question more broadly in terms of internalism and externalism, I think there is a set of questions here about relying on the internalist beliefs that I think could run into some troubling issues. So you might think, well, how am I going to determine, I have a set of moral beliefs about what I ought to do. The way that I determine how I should choose between my different moral beliefs is only possibly going to be determined by my belief about how I should determine what to do among my moral beliefs. And you might think that continues regressively upwards, right? Well, how do I decide between the different possible beliefs I have about how I could possibly aggregate between my lower level moral beliefs? Well, I appeal to my second order beliefs about how I treat my first order beliefs about how I aggregate there. So that's in general, I think, a problem for internalism in this context. There is a proposal that Christian Tarsney, the mentor that I worked with this summer, has written about at some point actually externalizing and having to rely, even if you're at the base level, doing the sort of content-based comparisons or a different sort of maximizing expected moral value over your initial moral beliefs that later down the line you might have to externalize in order to avoid some of those regressive issues. But I think you're right to bring it up because it is going to be a problem that anybody using internalism is going to have to contend with.
Nice. Should I get going?
Yes.
Cool. So for my CERI project, I was working on a project on training reinforcement learning agents, RL agents, in iterated prisoners' dilemmas. Cool. So we'll start off with the motivation for this project. This project is mainly about AI safety. In the future, we'll probably have powerful AI systems which are interacting with other AI systems and with humans. And it's important to ensure that these systems which we develop are robust. So then we need to try to avoid failure modes that they might fall into. One of the failure modes that they might fall into is a failure to cooperate, when each system has an incentive to affect or cause a bad outcome for others to cause benefit to themselves. And we want to try to avoid that kind of behavior. This is likely to be even more difficult to ensure because these systems are likely to be learning in the real world. So we can develop these systems in the lab and we say, oh, look, we've got good cooperation behavior. But if we want to put them in the real world where they continue to gain data about how to act in the real world, then the strategies which they developed in the lab may be overwritten by the new experiences that they have. And so we want to try and avoid this kind of them developing this kind of behavior. So the goal of this project is to investigate these kind of cooperation dynamics, hopefully find these dangerous failure modes, and then maybe find ways to avoid them. Cool. So we'll start with we'll move on to a project overview. So we're training these reinforcement learning agents to play iterated prisoners dilemmas. Reinforcement learning is the current main way to make AI agents which kind of learn and act in the world rather than just like classify pictures of dogs. These choose to take actions. And the iterated prisoners dilemma is a simple setup with cooperation and defect dynamics described by this like matrix here. We have two players and they each can choose to take actions to cooperate or defect. And then depending on which action both players choose, they both get a return. So if both players choose to cooperate, they both get a score of 3. While if player 1 chooses to defect and player 2 chooses to cooperate, player 1 gets a score of 5 and player 2 gets a score of 0. So they like locally have an incentive to defect, but if they both defect, then they both get a lower outcome. Yeah, and so we're looking at multi-agent reinforcement learning. So rather than having just like one agent play as the only agent in the system, we're going to be looking at what happens when you have multiple agents playing around. And hopefully this will allow us to gain these useful insights into cooperation dynamics for these powerful AI systems that we're likely to see in the future. For training our reinforcement learning agents, we can train them against like fixed policies, like not another reinforcement learning agent, or we can train them against other reinforcement learning agents. An example of a fixed policy is called tit for tat, which is a common policy used for iterated prisoners dilemmas. In tit for tat, this is a policy which always plays the opponent's previous move. So therefore, it causes the opponent to have an incentive to cooperate, because otherwise then the tit for tat policy will start defecting, causing bad outcomes for the opponent. Cool. So now we'll move on to a quick introduction to reinforcement learning. Hopefully this goes well. So reinforcement learning is this way to make agents which kind of learn and act in the real world or in the world rather than take actions. And it can be thought of as a loop. So these agents, they observe the environment. From this observation, they decide to take an action. And then after they take this action, they receive a reward based on the new state of the state of the world, and they get a new observation from the environment. And then they can use this reward to learn how to take better actions in the future and take their actions which lead to higher rewards. So for our iterated prisoners dilemmas, we have these actions, we have defect and cooperate, we have this reward signal given by that payoff matrix, but we need to have an environment. RL agents are typically kind of memoryless. They don't like, the previous, which means that the next state of the world depends only on the current state and not on any previous states. And so this is quite difficult for iterated prisoners dilemmas because these agents need a memory of what's been played such that they can actually develop complex strategies. And one way to do this is to kind of store the current game history in the environment. So this means that at each step of the game, the agent gets kind of shown what moves have already been played. And then from this, they can be like, yes, cooperate, defect, defect, and then see which strategies would be good to play in the future. And here we're kind of operationalizing this with, here's the player 1 and player 2 and all their cooperation defect actions that have been played so far. And we're using the standard RL algorithms if you care about this, PPO and DQN. So we'll start off with some single agent training. So here we're training a single reinforcement learning agent against this fixed tit for tat policy. So tit for tat is a strategy which always plays the opponent's previous move. For the setup of these experiments, we're playing 100 prisoners dilemmas games per each episode. So that means if both agents always cooperate, they both receive a score of 3 for 100 games. So therefore they get a maximum score of 300. And if they both always defect, then they both get a score of 100. But you can get scores outside and inside of this range, depending on what moves are played. So playing versus training this reinforcement learning agent versus this tit for tat policy, we can see that in this figure here, the agent has learned to always cooperate. So here, this is kind of the training progression, and it starts off kind of randomly, and then moves up to a score of constantly getting around 300. And so that's interesting. Yeah, this is learn to cooperate, but also we can also fall into this always defect dynamic, where it starts playing randomly and it gets much worse It just defects every game, and the tit for tat policy defects every game. You can probably get this always defect policy because kind of locally, it's like, oh, if I play one move, if I defect this game, then I get a slightly higher reward, even though in general, if for the longer term, this is a bad idea. So this simple reward metric of just 300 reward per game is actually quite a bad metric for evaluating policies that we like. The policy of always cooperate is not very good. It can easily be taken advantage of. It's quite vulnerable to any other player that chooses to defect at all. And yeah, so alternatively to this, we'd maybe want our agents to learn something like tit for tat. So if an agent learns something like tit for tat, then it kind of encourages its opponents to also cooperate with it. And so we define this tit for tat fraction, or this tit for tat similarity, which is what fraction of the time does the agent play the move that tit for tat would play. And we can do this by generating a bunch of partially complete game histories and seeing what move would tit for tat or the agent play, and seeing what fraction of the time these are the same. So here we're training our single agent versus tit for tat. And we can see, so a tit for tat fraction of 0 means it's playing the opposite move of tit for tat. 0.5 means it's uncorrelated with tit for tat, and 1 is exactly the same as tit for tat. And we can see here that the single agent doesn't learn tit for tat. So these graphs here, we've run these training iterations and then looked at the agent at the end of training and evaluated how similar it is to tit for tat. And each of these single grid points is one of those runs. And we evaluated this over the learning rate, which is how much we update on each data point, and gamma, which is our discount rate, which is how much you care about the future reward. And training against the single agent doesn't learn tit for tat, but does often fall into regions of always cooperate or always defect, depending on these hyperparameters, which is a bit worrying because you thought you might be, oh, look, we're in this always cooperate region, but it's right next to a region of always defection. Alternatively, rather than playing versus tit for tat, we can play against a separate policy of tit for tat, then defect forever. So this is a policy which starts playing tit for tat, and then at a random turn, it starts defecting forever. And so the idea is here that the reinforcement learning agents should start cooperating, but then when their opponent starts defecting, they will also defect. And so this should give us a policy similar to tit for tat. And we can see here that there are regions of this learning rate and gamma space where they're blue, that's a higher tit for tat fraction. And so we can learn policies up to 85% similar to tit for tat, which is quite good, far better than that, 50%, that zero correlation that we saw with just learning versus tit for tat. But we can also see that there are some regions of the hyperparameter space which worryingly fall into always defect. So that's something to consider. So, that in this hyperparameter space, it's easy to form these bad equilibria. For that best agent, this one that learned 85% tit for tat, we can see that learned quite a good policy. So that we saw that before, if the opponent starts defecting on the first turn, then the maximum score the agent can receive is 100. And then if they both cooperate for the whole turn, then they can both get 300. And we can see that this best agent can get as high as 300 and never scores below 100 at the end of training, which is kind of the optimum policy. So now we want to move on to multi-agent learning. So this is a lot harder than single agent learning. The other player is in some sense part of the environment. The agents don't model each other explicitly. They're just like, I'm acting in the environment, or it's acting kind of weirdly. And they don't actually consider the fact that there's explicitly another agent acting there. And because both agents are learning, this means that the environment is non-stationary. So as training progresses, the environment is changing, and this makes training quite unstable and a lot more difficult. And we can see here that at the start of this training, here are the rewards for the two agents. They're kind of wiggling about quite a lot at the start as they're changing, and then the environment's changing, and then they keep changing. And then eventually they often fall into this always defect dynamic, which is quite bad. So we did this similar thing, going over these two hyperparameters and seeing what happens in the space. And worryingly, we can see that these agents robustly learn to always defect. This seems quite bad. The default mode for agents in a in the iterated persistence dilemma is to always defect, and this seems like something we should worry about and try to like fix for future AI systems which are in these kind of cooperate defect dynamics. One way that I thought we could maybe look at this is look at the effects of pre-training. So we could train these agents versus policies and then sick them against each other. And hopefully that the strategies they learned in pre-training might carry over and affect how they act when acting with other reinforcement learning agents. So I trained them against both tit for tat and also tit for tat then defect. So here are the tit for tat agents are in yellow, are in orange and red, and we see that they robustly learn, always cooperate. But then as soon as the pre-training ends, they robustly fall into always defect. This is quite bad and shows that pre-training versus tit for tat is not like non-effective strategy for ensuring cooperation. Alternatively, pre-training versus tit for tat then defect. We can see that this on this figure here is the like similarity to tit for tat. It increases during pre-training, which is what we would expect. And then once we stop pre-training, it does decrease, but the cooperation fraction doesn't drop to 0 instantly like the tit for tat agent did. So that's promising that this pre-training might have some effect, but it's certainly not robust. And it seems like in general, as like time goes on, these agents are also likely to fall into these defect dynamics. So pre-training might help a bit, but it's certainly not a silver bullet. Cool. So in conclusion, we've been training these reinforcement learning agents, which are again in iterated persistence dilemmas. For the single agent case, training versus tit for tat doesn't learn good strategies. Training versus tit for tat then defect can learn something close to tit for tat, which is quite nice, but this is incredibly dependent on the hyperparameters. And so some regions of tit for tat are right next to our regions of always defect. And so for future systems, we should consider this is something that might happen and try to design algorithms which don't do this. Then we're training our multiple agents. By default, these robustly fall into always defect, which is quite bad. And we should also, so we should consider this dynamic for AI systems in the real world. Pre-training might help a little, but it doesn't seem to be a robust solution. And so there's probably some future work that needs to be done here. Cool, thanks. That's my presentation. I'd like to thank all the CERI people and my mentor, John Burton.
Thank you, Peter. I think we'll open up the floor to questions now. Does anyone have any questions for Peter? I think, Arvo, did you raise your hand or did I just?
Sorry, I uploaded. It's very similar.
Does anyone have any questions? Yes, Sally.
Sorry, this is from an amateur perspective on this, but I'm wondering, does the duration of the training affect the final outcome with multiple agents defecting and cooperating?
Let's see, I think, so you can see here, so this is like as training goes along. And at the start, I guess it does, but then like after a certain amount of time, it's pretty robustly fallen to just like always defect. Yeah, if you train it for longer, I'm not sure. I don't think there will be very much change.
Thanks.
As I guess like a follow-on question, Peter, how do you see sort of like, do you have any plans for taking this research further? Or how do you see this can be taken further?
Yeah, let's see. I guess there's a few things to try. So we can try like reproduce some interesting like game theory results, maybe changing some of the dynamics such that the game isn't of fixed length, and then that might mean that the agents don't have an incentive to defect every time, which would be a interesting result to see if we can like reproduce in reinforcement learning agents. Yeah, but in general, we're going to try publish a paper out of this, which would be quite fun.
Okay, I think that's all we have the time for. So thank you for the presentation, Peter. And I think Anna, you're up next.
Yes. All right, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you. So hi, my name is Katariina Wisakanto, and I'm pleased to share with you today some ideas on how the paradigm on human thought is shifting. The title of this talk is Truncation of Humanity's Space of Ideas, how machine learning systems cumulatively limit cultivation of novel thought in the long term. So somewhere between the intersection of somewhere in the intersection of non-technical AI alignment, anthropology, and social sciences is a neglected area of research about how machine learning systems are transforming our space of ideas. I say neglected because there appears to be very little research on what mammothian data systems do to the range of human thought. Though there exists work on how digital prompting affects our attention spans and dopamine levels in the areas of behavioral science and physiology, and on the effects of recommendation systems on our preferences or even on how we perceive the world, the cumulative and interconnected effects of current and future machine learning systems have consequences on human thought far beyond these local explorations. At its core, this talk is about how ideas governed by automated systems might prove to be pervasive in society and cause advantageous cultural development to slow down and potentially create an exclusive environment in which key ideas needed to assess existential risks will not persevere. This impact on ideas will be characterized with 3 propositions and some points of interest for further research. First, we'll ascertain that the impact of machine learning systems on humanity's collective thought is tangible and potentially limiting. Second, we'll look at how machine learning systems choosing arbitrary convergence points for knowledge affect the very space of ideas humanity is capable of spanning, where space of ideas is a new concept we will introduce. And third, explore how the truncation of the space of ideas limits the cultivation of novel thought in the long term. But first, let's untangle why this is interesting to begin with and how this is relevant to existential risk. Why should we be concerned? Because novelty and diversity of thought is needed to solve complex problems like existential risks, such as global warming or synthetic biology. And a limited range of thought has direct impact on humanity's continued existence, as well as levels of potential suffering. And because if we cannot realize the unknown unknowns, the unknown thoughts, we might fail to mitigate existential risks, but also potentially place ourselves up in a world of predestination in which novel thought cannot enter, where we might not realize our full potential. Firstly, let's assess the proposition that the impact of machine learning systems on humanity's collective thought is tangible and potentially limiting. In this context, machine learning systems or algorithms are understood as automated analytical models that improve automatically through the use of data and experience. It means that they predict outcomes that are optimized on unseen data, and we get loss of variance and increase of bias in these systems. But above all, you want to keep your mind on how they make things more homogeneous. So how do machine learning systems impact novel human thought? And how do we grasp this? Some of the implications of this impact are easy for us to understand, like book recommendations that lead to a more homogeneous reading experience. So libraries might opt out to safeguard societies and individuals' interests. Some things are easily measurable, like how publicly available code leads programmers using general code snippets for unique problems leading to cybersecurity problems, meaning they did not understand the solution they procured and which was available online. And others are potentially completely hidden to us, like what happens when the first national AI strategy is announced and has an ideological and a philosophical impact on strategies made by other nations afterwards. So how does being first impact human thinking on AI in the long term? What happens when at some point first simply follows from what existed previously? What sort of feedback loops are we dealing with in terms of culture, our shared space of ideas? And how does the copy-paste culture limit the cultivation of our original ideas? Let's have a look at how humanity cultivates knowledge and how machine learning systems choosing arbitrary convergence points affect the very space of ideas we are capable of spanning, shifting the human paradigm of thought. And we do this by introducing the concept of space of ideas. So how do we cultivate human thought? Historically, we gather and synthesize ideas in different mediums. Spoken language for the present with specific words to hold concepts. Songs and poems to transfer generations. Written word to store those insights for persons far removed from us by time and space. As the complexity of these concepts and ideas grew, we started storing them in institutions such as states and universities and systems such as libraries. And further, more recently, in data storage, governed by automated filters such as machine learning systems that choose the content for us, such as search engines, and rankings such as citations. Traditionally, humanity develops ideas and distills them into concepts by exploring multiple avenues of thought and convergence on the points of consensus, and diverging on points of contention, as defined by the majority's normative values, as ascertained as facts by the scientific method or by experience. So how can we illustrate this cultivation? In this figure, we see how humanity's ideas progress in time. Several trajectories converge when an idea is found to be sound, and might diverge when several directions from that consensus are worth exploring. Sometimes ideas are disregarded by chance or time, and forgotten or lost. Other times, alternative trajectories might persevere alongside a main consensus, such as is the case with conspiracy theories and the like. What sort of paradigm shift are machine learning systems then responsible for, and how do they govern the cultivation of thought? In this figure, we see trajectories of human thought where systems enforce homogeneous thinking, truncating the range of thought that could have been spanned. Some variance and exploration of ideas on divergence is lost. The convergence doesn't necessarily happen where it would be as defined by our moral values or scientific experiments, which appears highly problematic. Instead, the convergence can be something arbitrary or the mean, for example. We then use these system outputs to cultivate our ideas, leading into a reinforcing loop. But what are some traditional constraints on thought? How is human thought constrained? In the individual terms, we have things like poverty, stress, socioeconomic circumstances, and bias. And on the collective side, we have things like information loss on societal collapse, loss of R&D on investment on bankruptcy, or political censure, or religious dogma. But to then look at like how do we combine what is constrained for humanity collectively, and we get the space of ideas. So imagine these constraints spanning a space for us. So we have illustrations of constrained dimensionless space of thought, where the same thoughts can be either inside or outside the knowledge gamut. If the idea is within the range of humanity's thought space, we might realize it. If the idea is outside humanity's range, we will forevermore be robbed of it, meaning that that particular trajectory of thought is not accessible to humanity. So how does this space transform? Let's explore how the truncation of space of ideas limits the cultivation of novel thought in the long term. First, something tangible from contemporary times. Here we see a figure with a causal loop diagram with investment in tech. So we have a reinforcement loop that causes homogenization of investment behavior, which is amplified with more cycles through the loop. Homogenization occurs at both population level, all investors behave more similarly, and at an individual level, each investor behaves more like its nearest neighbors. So this is a form of truncation as diversity in investment is lost. So how does human thought truncate and erode novelty and diversity of ideas? After all, we are subject to interconnected amounts of systems and assemblies of different machine learning systems with cumulative effects. Some of my favorites are how we might get funneled into predetermined life trajectories once all admissions are done automatically, or how cultural development might slow down, or how the technocracy might inherit a legacy paradigm they cannot control and realign. It's more uncertain that an expansion of the space of ideas necessarily leads to more utility. We might also think that more idle human beings with the resources to engage in innovative thinking would lead to more novel ideas. That machine learning systems instead expand our horizons on what we can envision. That we have new ways of collaborations and synthesis of thought, but this is not in any way given. Some future inquiries on this would be to check if the space of ideas scale. It seems likely to suffer from the law of diminished returns. It would be interesting to look at cumulative effect assessment. So on the technical side, a cumulative effect assessment of machine learning. And from the philosophical point of view, what is the cumulative effect assessment of machine learning on ideas directly, and different forms of causal analysis to look at these reinforcing feedback loops. And with this, I conclude and thank you. Special regards to my mentor, Sabin Roman, from the Center from the Study of Existential Risk, who has been a great resource, as well as to the CERI organizing team. And a shout out to the fellowship cohort for great conversations in this subject and others, and for the audience for joining today. Please send me an email with any relevant thoughts, people I should connect with, or related research you know of, as the work on this and similar metacognitive questions continues. I'll be happy to take any questions after this.
Thank you, Anna. If anyone has any questions, feel free to unmute yourself and ask away. I guess a question from me. If AGI is developed in the future that has capabilities that surpass humans in all cognitive tasks, including creativity, how would that affect your concerns?
Yeah, because then if we are in the case that we have these very nice systems, what would probably happen in such a case, like if we do get this creativity from AGI and so on, we will probably end up in a case where this system that we inhabit and that those systems that we have access to, those probably have a very long distance to the actual sort of reality or the sort of social world that we actually inhabit. So we would have this system and we would be very connected to it, and we would certainly harness the benefits of it, but it might be very far away from the reality that we actually want to inhibit. So cases of this can be that there are, for example, some branches of science that we might think have sort of veered off from the human consensus on what is sort of good for us. So for example, there are some offshoots of science like economy and like string theory and theoretical linguistics that sort of veer off into the theoretical side so much that the connection to sort of reality is not as strong anymore. So we might end up in a sort of a simulated world, which is not as attached to reality as we would prefer.
Thank you. Yeah, that was an insightful response. Does anyone else have any other questions?
Some lovely comments in the chat. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks for the talk. This is super interesting. Strikes me as like quite like different and unique from of like a from other things that I hear people talk about with the potential of ML systems, and I'm wondering if you know of any like other researchers who are looking at this type of thing, it's sort of like it like has elements like history of ideas or like development of ideas, but then also the interaction there with ML systems. Is there like a space of people who are like thinking about this type of thing? It just strikes me as a potentially like really cool research area. So I want to read more.
Yeah, absolutely. So that was what I was thinking as well. So I first had some thoughts about it, and all along this whole process, I was thinking that this must be research that exists. I was just thinking, I'm not looking for the right things. I don't have the right words. I'm missing some, you know, vernacular to actually look for these things. And so I just kept on searching, and it appears very strongly at this moment that this is so sort of interdisciplinary or new, that there's not really much stuff out there. There's some fringe things you can find. So like if you want to think of something like the space of ideas, for example, so you can find some fringe things like something called the noosphere, which is like a forgotten Wikipedia article from some years that sort of never caught on, or similar things. So actually I'm super eager to hear more from you if you can think of related research, but as far as I know, this doesn't really exist yet.
Yeah, it's super interesting that, sorry, go ahead. So yeah, I think you unmuted.
Oh, I was going to say Hayden posted that Spotify has done things on like so about diversity of music listening and stuff. So you might find there have been specific targeted applications or of this type of thinking, how to preserve diversity of ideas and like certain zones of things, like Spotify with music, and maybe like Netflix has tried to do with movies or something like that.
Yeah, excellent. This whole conversation about art and music is super interesting, because we can, for example, look at pop music and we can see that it's turning more homogeneous. But then you have to sort of, you know, you have to keep your mind open, and you have to realize that, okay, but we also have a lot of new instruments and new genres of music. So you shouldn't be too fast to say that we are actually going towards a more homogeneous art in any way, because everybody loves to say that art is dead, sort of.
Yeah, I think it's less that the whole distribution of music in the world is getting more homogeneous, but just Spotify wants to make sure that their algorithms don't converge to something, and that maybe they're only getting like a small chunk of what is out there or something like that. Sorry, I don't want to monopolize the conversation here, but it's cool.
No, it's super cool. Spotify wants to do their due diligence on as well, not not veering us off to too boring music. Thank you so much for the questions and the comments.
Right, I think that's all we have the time for. Thanks, Anna, for the insightful presentation. And now our final presenter for the day, Arvo, you're up next.
Thank you so much. Let me just get this going. Cool. So, can you see my presentation?
Yes.
Sorry, 2 seconds. Fantastic. Okay. Well, thank you for passing over. I must say I'm really happy to be part of this CERI fellowship. I've had a terrific time, and it's really lovely to see all the projects coming together in this symposium today. It's Friday, 8 p.m. So I'm going to do a quick background and some general lessons from myself. I hope they're useful to you. So some general lessons first, and then dive into any technical details, only we have the time. I'll aim for 5 minutes of Q&A at the end, as usual. So first, let's do some background. So the risk from sudden AI explosion or a tight race between global superpowers, or indeed it can be anything, it could be Google and OpenAI, it's more likely to be neglected by the traditional policymaker than a slowly progressive development of an AI ecosystem. So these are two contrasting ways for AI to be of a massive importance. And if you're not too familiar with them, don't worry too much. Just bear with me that this is possibly more likely to be neglected, because when it's a slow progressive thing that takes over, then there's more room to notice, there's more room to act, and there's more room for changing problematic incentive structures, like we're seeing with climate change, for example. Whereas if this is a single event and an AI explosion occurs, policymakers might not get a warning until it's too late, basically. So this project explores how one might model such scenarios involving a sudden risk escalation. And we do this with game theory tools. So the interaction between context, strategic decisions, and risk is observed. That's kind of the objective here. I'll break it down in two questions just now. And the idea is to create a model that can allow us to describe things better. So I'll just show you the questions because I think that's more useful. And for this, I need to talk about this point of no return, just so that it's in everyone's mind. And what I mean by this deployment being a point of no return-ish is that it's either impossible, so it's practically too difficult to turn off an AI system once it's been deployed, or it's just simply too costly. And this might be because the AI was given weapons, and once it does something, it might lead to catastrophic risk, or it might be because it is given access to the internet and you can't turn it off because it replicates itself in the internet, etc. So that's kind of what's going on in the background. So there are two key questions. So what do player strategies look like when racing to develop and deploy transformative AI? Just bear in mind, players are, it can be China and the US, the example I go for in my head. This is the descriptive question that's in the background. And eventually, the question we really want to answer is, how do we make the world better? How are incentives, traits, interactions, and mechanisms able to improve so that we reduce catastrophic risk? And this is a normative question, which we can hopefully say something at some point, but there's plenty of work to do in getting things right descriptively so that we can say something useful normatively and make recommendations. So I kind of divided this into a bunch of different games for the descriptive part, going from a one interaction between the two players, which is then expanded in a repeated interaction. At first, I kind of just set out the AI traits, and I say, this is the AI you're getting, it's this safe and it's this advanced. And then I let them change this. But to be honest, there's enough to say about the earlier, more simple cases. Eventually 1.5, it's a dynamic game where they can continuously invest and optimize whether or not they should change the funding for safety or for progress, and these are kind of like real-time decisions, and they can kind of react continuously. I've not done that one, but it seems very interesting, and it's ideally something that's doable at some point. I'll talk about this tool in a bit. And then, as I said, part two is the normative, and hopefully there are some lessons we can draw from these 6 things. But the normative, I see it as a more ambitious project, and that is the general project. Okay, so I wanted to do, I was thinking, how do I do this? I have 20 minutes, it's not very much. 5 lessons seems like a good idea. So 5 key lessons from the experience. I wanted to do it not just the model itself, but just the whole experience. And there's some content specific stuff, but I've tried to come up with more general research lessons that might be of interest to other fellows and people at an early career stage, regardless of how much they care about this AI stuff. So the first one is that ends are important. So this might seem a bit more of a meta level lesson, and it is, but I thought it was worth including. If you ask any seasoned microtheorist, they'll say that you need to draft 10 models before you come up with one that's remotely okay. And that's all, that it's all part of the process. And I started CERI with a project where the transformative AIs were representing the countries. And there were just way too many uncertainties as to how they might represent the countries, what kind of bargaining power they would be given, what were the, like, basically the environment was way too unclear. And I basically changed topics, and dead ends taught me a way to hack this problem of lacking information, and to formulate explicit assumptions that were needed to eventually lay out the game. So this led to a change of topic, and more towards the R&D race that I'm talking about today. And it got me thinking about how to map our beliefs about how the world is, and so that you can reach a model, so that you can produce recommendations. And I'll come back to this later. I'll show you a little diagram. The general point is, appreciate dead ends. They're sometimes really unavoidable. Okay, so this one is slightly more technical, and basically saying ratchet effect type scenarios are important to identify. So a ratchet effect is an implicit disincentive for one of the players, typically the agent, for those of you that know this, this stuff, to exert effort. In this case, in cooperating or seeming nice. Let's call them seeming nice. So it can occur in early periods of the interaction, because if a player acts nicely, i.e. in this case makes a big effort to have a safe artificial intelligence agent, then it creates the expectation from the other player's perspective that they're nice more generally, and that they're going to be spending money doing AI safety, and you don't have to worry about China's unsafe AI because they seem to be doing really great work. And this ironically can be really bad for those that are being nice, because it means that the other player is less likely to go out of their way to incentivize this safe behavior. After all, incentivizing safe behavior is costly. So trying to influence others to do the right thing can be costly. And so if they're doing it for free, you're not going to try and push them towards it. And this can be really important here, because the end goal is something that's safe. And what's interesting is agents will lie, or players lie and pretend, especially in repeated interactions, that they don't care about certain things that they secretly do care about. So that's why I've got this image about lying here. And they do this lying about their preference if it's strategically favorable. So they pretend to care less about safety, as the running example, so that the other party worries and cares extra. So say China secretly cared about safety, but they pretend that they don't, so that the US gets really worried and says, oh no, China is doing nothing, we need to do so much more. And then China, who cared about safety, has its opponent doing the right thing in their mind, just because they acted cool. Let's put it that way. So as I said, I found this especially present in these R&D type races, and it's worrisome in repeat interaction settings. Okay, flexibility truly matters. You might see this heading and think, what cool new stretch am I going to learn today? But no, it's not yoga, or it's not even mental adaptability, although both seem important. I'm talking about a model that can cope with future forecasts and experts changing their minds. And especially for any long-term projects, it's crucial to be able to adapt to new information and views, since there are so many empirical uncertainties right now. So say that this happens in 50 years, what we think in 30 years will be really crucial. And if the model breaks when it's twisted, then it's of limited use, whereas if it can adapt to being bent, then it will likely stand the test of time. So my next one is computing is valuable even early. So for something this abstract, it didn't seem necessary or helpful to translate any elements into code. But even simple seeming elements can quickly become too painful and slow or unnecessarily repetitive to handle by hand. So even a spreadsheet can help, but also a few lines of code when there are so many possibilities. So for example, I had a thing where so nature is picking 3 options from a signal that I'll hopefully have time to explain, but if not, just bear with me. And then each of these had another 3 options. And then each of these had 5 options. And then each of these had another 5 options. And each one of these, so I think there's 225 options. Each of these was a game. This is a game. And then I had to think about each of these games because they had different payoffs. And yeah, doing that by hand, it's just not, it's just unimaginable. So that's this lesson. Number 5 is spoilers don't just ruin films. So I became aware that there's this paper, I've mentioned it later, called Racing to the Precipice, that is basically doing an alternative approach to something very adjacent to what I'm doing. And I think my project would be fundamentally different if I'd been aware of that from the get-go. So, and I kind of owe this to Lauren as well for being so encouraging to not look at certain things until I've tried my best to squeeze my own models. But yeah, basically, had I seen it week 1, I probably wouldn't have chosen this topic at all, and I wouldn't have made my model the way it is, and I would have been discouraged to attempting a bunch of things, and I would have found it very limiting. So this is very hard because the literature can be extremely helpful, and it often is, and it's inspiring, but it's also it's constraining, and it kind of ties into the previous presentation about it makes us converge into a certain framework or a certain paradigm or a number of assumptions, which is very interesting. Okay, so I am wondering what I should show you, because okay, I'll briefly mention the chain of impact stuff. So here's the diagram I wanted to show you about what a model is hopefully doing. So we have, I don't know, can you see this? Can someone just nod or say something?
We can see it.
Nice. Okay, so we have some beliefs about the world, and the idea is that we take those beliefs, and there's many options for what you might believe, and then when you ask certain questions, so these are like questions, then you can specify certain parameters. So I'm constraining this. This is not just some general beliefs. This is beliefs that are relevant to this model. So beliefs that are relevant to the environment that you think will be the one for an AI race or whatever situation is pertinent. And then these different parameters themselves, oh, screen frozen. Screen, okay. Specify games. So depending on how you calibrate these, you end up with different games. And then these games, some will share some analysis, and you can kind of, this is where it's kind of making something interactive and something that can adapt is really valuable. You have whatever thing you care about, and then you end up with some analysis, and eventually, depending on what analysis, you get some recommendation. And the idea with these recommendations is that they're recommending effective policies or interventions, etc. And that's precisely the kind of thing that I have in mind with a flexible, so this is to do with a flexible lesson. And even though there are certain things that are highly unlikely to happen, it's highly valuable to be prepared for them, and having some robust, flexible, well-calibrated tools is incredibly useful. So this is the chain of impact that I see my model having. And more generally, this model could be insightful for more comprehensive developing of key technology. So there might be things that take the assumptions boxes, even that are not AI. So I wrote down vaccines, but I don't have time to discuss that at the moment. I'm saying this model, even if it fails to help with AI, might help with some other related thing. Okay, so here I was going to show you a bit of the behind the scenes stuff. I have not very much time, and I will still show you a bit what the payoffs look like. Cool. So this is just so that you get an idea of the behind the scenes setting. This is how I've modeled the payoff. So each player, they get 4 different things. So they get some points if they win the race. It's different if they tie, but that's just some nuance we can ignore for now. They get minus some cost of deploying if they decide to deploy. They get minus some risk that they're adding to the world times how much they care about the risk. So this is catastrophic risk aversion. And well, interestingly, this can be from their AI or from their opponent's AI. So there's some interaction here. And finally, they get some benefits. So even if their AI, so whatever the AI ends up being, they can exploit their AI once they've deployed it, and they can use it. It assumes that the more advanced the AI, the more useful it is. And just to get a general idea of the very simple case, or they can either wait or deploy, and this happens for both players. And then depending, this is assuming that both have transformative AIs, they either win or lose, or nothing happens, or they tie. And if nothing happens and there's repeated interaction, then the tree grows. Just as a setup thing, so behind the scenes before we wrap up and go to the Q&A, they're getting 4 signals. So they're getting 2 internal signals, and they have a signal about where their progress is. So progress here, it's a positive real value, and the same with safety. And they're getting some signal of, oh, it's here. You have an AI a safety of 5 and a progress of say 9, whatever. And then that determines the structure of the game. And now that these signals are noisy, and basically it's plus minus some value. And they also get signals for their opponent's AIs. Now they're obviously even noisier, and this is how noisy is something you can specify depending on your beliefs. So it kind of goes back to the diagram. You can change how noisy it is, and then that will not break the model, but the model can take that into account. Okay, so I can talk about that more in detail if anybody wants me to. I had some sources that there's definitely no time to discuss. This is the paper I was mentioning, Racing to the Precipice. And this other paper also does very similar things. It's quite new, it's very interesting. Yeah, paths going forward is to build a tool that is interactive, that I've been learning how to do this myself, so that people can specify what their beliefs are, and then you end up with some analysis, some digestible recommendations. Here are some sliders that I've suggested, and yeah, there are many extensions to the project. Basically, one key problem is making sure that the concepts have an external meaning and not just internally make sense in my model, so that they can use forecasts to be calibrated and experts' opinions to be calibrated. Cool, I've run out of time. So thank you so much for everything. A huge thanks to Laura and Matt for their guidance, and to the CERI team for bringing us all into the same virtual room and launching this program. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Arvo. If anyone has any questions, feel free to unmute and ask away.
Yeah, I have a question on, during this research that you did, what was the most surprising thing to you, or the most interesting thing that you discovered along the way?
And the most interesting thing I discovered in terms about myself, about the project, about the area, I guess, so I'm going to just guess that you mean content-wise. I don't know for sure. This is like, it feels like someone asking for my favorite film, and I always make this face. I don't know, but my top 5 is probably, and generally about the whole experience, are probably the lessons that I included in this presentation. And content-wise, I think 2, the ratchet effect thing that I probably didn't have enough time to thoroughly explain. And then like, just basically agents pretending to be something they're not, having such a big impact on the way the games go. That is the thing that surprised me the most, I think. Or like, it just like, I don't know if surprise is the right word, because it's like intuitively so, but that I thought was like super interesting, and that we like need to look out for when working in this area.
Yeah, this makes me think of this connection to Sami's work, right, as well, because there was this like, okay, so this shows of force or pretending to do something like it's very interesting that this signals can be so strong.
I guess the economics training shows, yeah, I was very tempted to make some parallels there as well.
I think that's all we have the time for. So that's going to be a wrap up for the presentations. So first of all, like hearty congratulations to all the fellows. Absolutely amazing presentations. I have enjoyed, I was going back and forth between both the Zoom rooms, and I really enjoyed watching them and seeing your projects take shape over the past 8 weeks. We all started back in July, first week, with still refining project proposals, and now we are here with final deliverables and presentations done. So I think that's been quite a journey, and also thank you to the mentors for supporting our fellows with their research, and to everyone else who has supported CERI. Making CERI happen in a matter of 2 months has been a challenge. So I would like to thank everyone who made that possible. The CERI team, all the external people who advised me, commented on my initial plans. And trust me, there were hundreds of documents outlining my initial plans. So making all of this happen has been an effort from many people. And I can feel a community happening from this. Like, I can feel this to be the start of something big, to put it ambitiously. So I think we have a LinkedIn group that I have just created, which will hopefully be a space where you can share resources or job opportunities or any other things that might be relevant to the CERI community. So please do join that LinkedIn group. I might also bug all of you with individual invitations if you don't. So bear with me if I do that. We also have a mailing list that you can sign up to as the society develops over the next few months. Hopefully we'll have some more events, reading groups during term time, or even course area specific fellowships that maybe the CERI fellows can be the facilitators for that, having been through the entire 8-week research program. So I hope that sort of this fellowship will be a starting point as you go and explore your careers in this space, and I hope this has been valuable for you. So yeah, I think to wrap up, it's been, for me personally, this has been an incredibly impactful project, that having an entire research fellowship that the model that we have developed this year, I think is highly scalable, that we could have 20 or 30 fellows next year, maybe even more. Obviously, maybe dependent on other things like funding and mentorship capacity. But I think this model is scalable, and I'm super excited to build up this community over the next few years, next few months. And I hope that you're as excited as I am for the start of CERI. This is the first public event that we have had. So this is the true start of CERI as a society. So yeah, I think that's all from me. This was basically a big ramble about thank yous to everyone who has contributed to making this happen. And thank you for coming today for the symposium and for engaging so well with the fellowship and the other events that we put on. And I know we put on too many of them, but I hope that you found them useful. And thank you. Yes, that's all from me. Unless if anyone has any questions or final thoughts, then feel free to speak up or put them in the chat or, yep.